Tredegar stands around 1,000 feet, that is about 330 meters above sea level. And those who live here know how quickly the weather can change, especially during wintertime when this program was filmed. Rain, wind, mild cloudy days, bright sunshine, bitter cold, and even snow were experienced. But these are typical conditions that have helped mould the character of town and people. In the year 1804, Thomas Henry Payne, who was rector of Llanbedr Church in the Usk Valley, followed this ridge between the Sahawi and Rumney valleys, riding along an old rough track that the local people, he said, called San Hir, the Stone Way. He was coming through a remote and backward region, which only a few years later would become iron-making centre of the world. In the year 1800, Tredegar Ironworks, because that was the name of the first town, began to appear almost overnight, it seemed, working the rich seams of minerals, coal and ironstone which lay just beneath the surface of the ground, wealth beyond the dreams of avarice. Houses clustered around the furnaces and around the coal works because nobody wished to walk very far to their labour. Reason indeed why the town came to a sudden end along a line which was roughly delineated by the modern A465 Heads of the Valleys road. Beyond that road rose the moorlands, the wide rolling moorlands of millstone grit and limestone, which come to a dramatic end in escarpments overlooking the Usk Valley. The Reverend Henry Payne continued his ride of 1804 across this very area. He had crossed Rumney Hill, from which he had seen Rumney Ironworks. He described seeing the Duke of Beaufort's birdhouse. He came down across this area where, he said, the Merthyr to Tredegar Turnpike Road was then a building. He crossed an ancient causeway, as he described it, and he rode up into the hills beyond, going towards the Crownland Valley and back to his home at Llanbedr. A few years later, this whole region was torn up and savaged and ravaged, digging for the minerals, the coal and the iron which lay just beneath the surface. This became Tredegar Patches, an area worked largely by women and children to get at the minerals just below the surface of the ground. Very shortly, this place had become an almost moon-like landscape, torn up, ravaged, destroyed. And it remained that way until it was decided on this area to construct the very beautiful Brynbach Country Park, which is a great lung for the whole of this area and very, very popular with the people of the whole district. Payne, an antiquarian, would have been fascinated by the 4,000-year-old spears that would later be discovered in a Bronze Age well at nearby Princetown, and bewildered by the quad motorbike course now occupying part of the hillside he rode across. He was following an ancient trackway towards a valley he knew as Cwm Garw Nant, now mutated into Crownon, although Tredegar people know it better as the Dyffryn.
Yeah, it's a cold winter's day today, but nothing like it was many years ago when these valleys were formed. They were gouged out by the glaciers, which not far to the north of here were half a mile more thickness. Difficult to imagine that now. And the landscape was completely barren and uninhabitable. Then about 12,000 years ago, of course, this ice melted very suddenly, much more suddenly than was once thought. And as the ice moved back, tundra formed and the reindeer and similar animals came in, followed very quickly again by trees. And the landscape which you see the odd forest now was much more heavily forested. The valleys in particular were heavily forested. As soon as the forests came in and the hunter-gatherers came in from Europe, which was all part of Britain in those days, of course, and we got evidence around here for their activities. Well, these hunter-gatherers damaged the environment to some extent because they made clearings for the animals to feed the animals they were hunting. But later, about 5,000 years ago, the real damage was done when the farmers started to come in. And if you look on the mountains today, you can see evidence of their dwelling places and corrals for cattle still here. So the damage they caused to the landscape was quite immense, but it was also brought about to a greater degree by climatic deterioration, which most people believe to be due to volcanoes erupting on the world and causing a blanket of darkness and heavy rain over the landscape. And evidence of much of this can be found right up there in Gwynant, where cores I took from the deep deposits of peat show ancient pollens, ancient fallout from volcanoes and other similar sort of microorganisms, which can give us an impression of the climate in those days. These people lived in various settlements all over these mountains, a surprising number, and we've still got the evidence today in various stone structures which have sunk into the ground to a large extent, which proves that at the time the climate was much milder than today, and their sites and cattle enclosures can be found widely spread.
Trevel is a village just south of Dyffryn Crownon, where limestone was quarried for local iron furnaces. Almost certainly Trevel took its name from nearby Torrevoil or Bear Hill and developed a character quite different from that of the coal and iron towns. On this very cold and very beautiful winter's morning, I'm at Trevel, just above Tredegar, and been joined by Alison Tippings, who is local councillor and a villager. Now, I've always thought this village is a fascinating place, Alison. Is it right that there are only 3 names here originally, 3 family names?
Yes, unlike the rest of the area, not many Joneses or Davises here, but plenty of Evanses, Williamses and Prossers. If you go to the village hall, which is now the rugby club, you will notice that some of the older rugby teams are entirely made up of Williamses and Evanses.
Oh,
so they had plenty of problems with their team sheets in those days.
Oh, yes, I see.
The village originally, of course, is a quarrying village.
Yes.
Mainly limestone, with the Trevel quarries just on the outskirts of the actual village, but also just below the public house. They used to call it the sandstone quarry, which was excavated to take materials to the Sahawi brickworks.
Yes.
Later years, the village quarry closed down and everything moved further up the road to the head of the Dyffryn Valley, where the Hendra and Ystrad quarries were opened. They closed down about 20 years ago, and recently the village quarry at Trevel is reopened and is now excavating limestone for concrete products.
Oh, well, and this is all Duke of Beaufort land, isn't it?
Yes, the whole of the village and all the mineral rights of the village are owned by the Duke of Beaufort. Most of the houses are either freehold or leasehold, and Horeb Chapel still pays a rent to the Duke of Beaufort, an annual rent of 50p a year.
Oh, well.
So it costs more for him to send us the bill and for us to send it back than the actual revenue from the rent itself.
Oh, that's lovely.
Horeb was built in 1830 and is the oldest, and was extended 50 years later, and that's Welsh independent. That's Cyfundeb Annibynwyr Cymraeg. The other chapel was built in 1846, 16 years later, and is Welsh Baptist. Only one public house exists in the village now, currently called Tafan Tiachaf, and it's quite interesting story behind that, because up until 10 years ago it was known as the Quarryman's Arms, but the locals knew it as Top House. It got taken over, and the new incumbent decided to add a bit of Welsh to the name, and it's the translation of Top House in Welsh is, of course, Tiachaf, so we call it Tafan Tiachaf now.
And of course the Brynol tramroad started here, didn't it?
Yes.
Falls Brynol running through to Talabont.
3 tramroads in the village. Just behind us we have the Trevel tramroad that took the limestone to the Sahawi and Beaufort ironworks. Then from the village pub northwards to Talabont, we have the Brno tram road, and the 8 Mile surveying point sits just north of the public house. And from that point across to Rumney, we have the Halls tram road, and that was built by the Rumney Iron and Steel Company, Iron Company. And the little village, the row we see behind us, Rumney Row, is in fact named after that iron company.
Oh, that's lovely. And I heard somewhere that the Horeb Chapel used to have a special tram. Of course, it's a horse-drawn tram road. It had a special tram to take its scholars out on trips around the Crown, which is just in the north.
It is alleged that, yes, they put special seats in there for the chapel outings down to the Talabont in the summer months.
Oh, yes. Oh, this is a fascinating place, Alison. I'm very glad you've given us your time and expertise here. So thank you very much indeed for that. Dukestown was an 18th century settlement that developed near Sahowie Ironworks, and so named because it stood on the Duke of Beaufort's lands. Some of the earliest iron working in the region took place here. Sahowie furnaces were pouring white-hot metal 20 or more years before the town of Tredegar was built. Well, I'm in Sgurfa with Philip Prosser, who is author of several very interesting, very important local historic photographic books. Now, Sgurfa is a fascinating area, Phil, and I believe there's something very near here which is of great interest. So what exactly is this, Philip?
Well, this is one of the Duke of Beaufort's boundary markers. And as you know, that the Duke of Beaufort owned most of the ground, well, he owned all the ground in Dukestown and Sgurfa.
Yes.
And as I say, Dukestown was here before Tredegar.
Before Tredegar, yes,
It was 20 or 30 years before Tredegar, before they did the Tredegar Ironworks anyway.
It's hard to believe that, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah,
and,
so he marked all his boundaries with stones. But why here? Why on this spot exactly? Why did he put the boundary marker here? Where was the territory?
I should think at the Nantmelyn Brook, which runs behind us, which runs under our feet at the moment.
Good,
anyway.
yeah,
This was something to do with the boundary marker here.
Right, so the Nantmelyn itself was the boundary, I suppose, between Breconshire and
it might have been,
Londondershire?
yes, most probably it was, yeah.
Yes, amazing, a territorial marker.
And as I say, at the top of the hill here, you've got the Duke Pit, which sunk in 1806.
Yes, yes.
About 100 feet deep, which they got coal at it, but the main thing was the ironstone.
Ironstone, of course.
And that was the first deep pit, I think, in Wales, you know.
Good God.
And then the ironstone then was taken to the river, which is the main river, the Sahowie. It was scoured, all the muck taken off, which you got for Sgurfa then for scouring, you know, the name scouring.
The name of the scouring
That's
place,
it,
that's right.
Yeah.
Of course, this was a great area for Chartism, wasn't it?
Yeah, just up behind us here in Starfield, or the Chartists used to meet, Zephaniah Williams, Frost. God. Thousands of people used to come from all over at the time, you know, for these meetings, you know.
Yes.
I say there is a plaque up there at the moment for marking the spot, you know.
Yeah, so of course, I mean, this was an iron working area, coal mining area, heavy thirst. There were dozens of pubs here, weren't there?
Oh, dozens of pubs, chapels.
Yes, of course.
You know, it was, I think there was about 14 or 16 pubs in Dukestown alone, you know.
Well.
Not a stone's throw from one another.
Of course, it was almost a self-contained village, wasn't it? It had its own shop.
Yes, just behind us here was a company shop, correct. Just, 100 metres away from here.
And what about doctors?
Oh, yeah, and Dr. Smith, there's a big, the house is still there, and Dr. Smith, and the funny tale about it, people used to go there to have their teeth extracted, and he'd put them out in the yard on a block of wood, and he'd extract the teeth with no anaesthetic or anything. Oh, no. You know, he just pulled them out with the pinchers or whatever they used at the time.
Oh, you're making my teeth curl thinking of that. Of course, there were chapels here as well, weren't there?
Oh, yes. And there's one of the first ones here was Carmel just standing behind us here.
Well. And of course, I mean, chapels in this area, and that's where we're going next. Do you know, this is a fascinating area, Phil. You think of the old days when this society was divided between public house and chapel. And speaking of those, we've just been joined by Barry Davis, who is an expert on chapels. He knows everything about these chapels in Sgurfa.
I wonder how many people realise the importance the chapels played in the cultural and the social life of the community in former days. Also in the spiritual life of the community, and also the fact that the Sunday schools, like the Sunday school here at Carmel, played in the educational well-being of the people. Young people were taught to read and write in these chapels in former days, and consequently the whole area was enriched culturally. Another fact we should bear in mind, that with the coming of the sanctuaries to this area, there was also this division and degree of antagonism between the congregations of the chapels and the rank and file who attended the public houses of the community. There were a number of ironworks in this area, and consequently working in these tremendous heat which is engendered in these ironworks, this in turn brought on a great thirst amongst the workmen, and consequently the popularity of the public houses increased. There was a substantial division between the community in former times, those who attended chapel and those who didn't. Those who attended the chapel tended to follow the dictates and the doctrine of the temperance movement in this area, and consequently they were at odds with the men and women who attended the public houses. It is recorded in Ebenezer Church history that the minister, the Reverend Richard Jones, was a great opponent of the Chartist movement. And consequently, on the night of the march to Newport, on November the 3rd, 1839, it is said that the insurgents were looking for him. And he in turn was very fearful, and it is recorded that he jumped into the feeder which fed the Sahawi works, and as such was up to his neck in water. Certainly not a very nice place to be on a dark November night. And this, Peter, is the very lane that the Reverend Richard Jones fled from the insurgents on that November night in 1839. And here we are at Ebenezer Church. It was at this church, Ebenezer, that Henry Hughes left for the United States in 1851 to embark on a new life in the United States. It was there that he arrived in Minersville in Ohio, and then he pressed on into Minnesota, going into the uncharted prairies and very often meeting up with hostile Indians, before he eventually found his haven of peace in Pasadena in California. During the Great Plague of Cholera of 1832 and 1848, the chapels of this town were full of worshippers, and consequently they had to employ shift systems in order to accommodate all the congregations.
Tredegar was birthplace of Aneurin Bevan, a local MP who became Minister of Health and based his National Health Service on the town's remarkable worker-funded medical aid society. John Adams was former sector administrator for the National Health Service in Blaenau Gwent, and over the years has done a great deal of research on Tredegar's Medical Aid Society, on which indeed the National Health Service was based. Tredegar Medical Aid Society, John, what can you tell us about it?
Well, this society, Peter, grew out of an earlier thing with the iron company in Tredegar from the early 1800s, in which workmen paid a small contribution out of their wages in order to get a doctor in the town. And the medical aid grew because eventually there were three societies in Tredegar. They were formed into one medical aid society under the leadership of a man called J.L. Herbert. And as you say, it is really from that organisation, and many of its ways, that the health service under Aneurin Bevan grew and was formed in the country.
Yes, yes. Of course, John, I can remember those surgeries sliding along the polished wooden benches waiting for the doctors.
That's quite right, Peter. No appointment system in those days, of course. Everyone just went there and sat there. And in times of slight epidemic, there would be hundreds of people crowding there. The benches were very well polished, of course. But yes, the surgeries gave a very, very good service to the people of Tredegar. Very good service. And each of the surgeries, of course, the one up the top end of town, the central surgery, which was opened in 1910, was really quite a showpiece. Plenty of room for doctors, plenty of consulting rooms, an excellent dispensary, a room upstairs, a double dental suite, and living accommodation, of course, for 2 doctors and their families.
Well, yes.
You know, which was an excellent thing to attract doctors.
Of course, doctors, in those days, most doctors didn't have cars, did they?
Oh, no, indeed. In the very early days, of course, they did their rounds on foot, or some of them even had horses, and they went out on the horses, particularly up to such places as Travel, up in the north, for example.
I'm sure that A.J. Cronin, who wrote The Citadel, of course, he objected to walking up, he hated walking up the ranks, as he called it, up those steep hills the other side of Georgetown there to visit his patients.
I've heard that too, Peter, that he didn't like that very much at all. And of course it is a hard walking place. It's steep, like most valley towns.
And of course, the other thing too that the medical aid did was established a wonderful hospital.
That's right. That hospital was established again by the Medical Aid Society following a public meeting in town, and opened in December 1904. That, of course, was a great move forward in the town, particularly as far as the collieries and heavy industry was concerned, because they had somewhere now to bring the accident victims and to be looked after. That, of course, again was paid for by the workmen with their contributions. It's quite wonderful, really, how, with the days of small wages, how these people did it.
Indeed. And of course, the matron, and she was a formidable figure, wasn't she?
Oh, my word, I should say she was. Everybody moved out of the way when the matron spoke.
Yes.
And they were all in their lovely starched uniforms and their aprons and their caps. And everything was shining in the hospital. And if it was a feather out of place and the matron saw it, my word.
Yes.
But what standards?
They were wonderful, wonderful days and wonderful standards.
Indeed. They were indeed. They were wonderful days. And
how was money raised for the hospitals apart from the initial outlay?
Well, apart from the contributions raised from the workmen, of course, they held an annual day every year, the hospital fete and gala day or week. It became a week, and the public then contributed by attending various things held in the town. So they supplemented the income from the workmen by those means. And at one time, of course, they even collected silver paper.
Ah, yes.
Yes, they even collected silver paper, which they sold on, and that helped a few more pounds to the hospital.
Of course, and many accidents underground were treated in Tredegar General Hospital, weren't they?
Very much indeed, yes, indeed they were. I mean, before that, in the early days, it was the kitchen table.
Yes.
Or, well, almost the top of the pit, one could say. It was very primitive, but they must have, when they had the hospital here, and in other valley towns, but we're conscious of this one, then, of course, it really started to take off. They were being looked after. Good theatre in Tredegar General Hospital. An up-to-date one supplied by the Tredegar Iron and Coal Company, a very up-to-date one, and it lasted in that way until the hospital surgery services closed when Neville Hall opened. So
yes.
it lasted many, many years.
And of course, it was on this system that Aneurin Bevan based the National Health Service.
That's right. He had been, of course, chairman of the hospital committee during the year, I think it was a year before he went up to Parliament. So he had some practical experience, both as a workman and on the committee itself.
Yes, indeed. Tredegar's famous clock tower dominates the circle, the open space always regarded as official centre of the town. This was one of the first areas built, and appropriately it now houses a town museum illustrating 200 years of local history. Ron Jenkins is a very well-known local photographer, former local councillor, who has established one of the finest photographic archives on any town in South Wales. He is also responsible for this very fine local museum in which we are now sitting. What gave you the idea of establishing this museum, Ron?
Well, the idea came from our well-known local historian, Mr. Oliver Jones, and it was his idea to set up this museum. and for the benefit of the people in Tredegar, of course. We can thank the people of Tredegar for granting use of all this and being gifted to us all the artifacts you see in the museum. We have a major printing press in the museum, which came from a local printer, Mr. Peaty, who brought the printer into Tredegar in 1848, and it was continually in use until 1960, and when it was granted to us. We've got the petrol pump, which is behind us. That came from S.L. Thomas, the ironmongers, in Commercial Street. And his uniform, in fact, lies in one of the cases here. He was in the Royal Flying Corps. Well, I was very fortunate in being able to get hold of some cases which actually came from the Victoria and Albert Museum. And they now contain very valuable artifacts of Tredegar's history. Also, within the cases, there are a number of firearms, replicas of the war age. One of the guns, actually, we believe was used in the Chartist movement days. One of the most interesting things in this museum, Peter, which I treasure, is the fact that this table, which was owned by Mr. Oliver Jones, and he really claims that the timber from this table came from Nelson's Victory. One of the most enjoyable things about this to me is that the fact that we have lots of children coming in, and they're amazed to see what life was like in the past. They are really interested in seeing what things were about in the early days.
Not far from where we are sitting, Ron, on the opposite side of the road, was the branch of the Monmouthshire and Glamorgan Bank. Now, isn't there an interesting tale about that house?
Yes, it's said that the bank manager had a young black servant girl who used to go to the bank doors and watched by people on the other side of the road with fascination because they'd never seen a black girl in Tredegar before.
That's lovely. And of course, one of the great tragedies of this town has been the loss of our Workmen's Hall and Institute.
Yes, I agree. It's a tragedy, a real terrible thing to happen, to see the famous historical Workmen's Institute, which was the centre, the heart of the town's culture in the town. It's sad to see it go. It had a tremendous history, originally built by the temperance movement, probably because of some of the conditions in those days, which demanded an interest for people, a facility for people to go to. So it was built in 1861 to satisfy the needs of the people in the town. The Institute building was the place where Nye Bevan, our famous political leader, spoke on many occasions. We had people in the early days, people like Charlie Chaplin, Gracie Fields. We even have people like Max Jaffa and his orchestra. We've had Mazejewicz, the international pianist, there. So it was a tremendous asset to the town.
It was indeed. And of course, just opposite that building is another very interesting structure connected with the history of this town.
Yes, the Tredegar in the early days had a contingent of Jewish people, and they were well accepted in Tredegar. And they had a church, which was the synagogue, which was set up in right opposite the Workmen's Institute building in Morgan Street.
Yes, well, we are in your lovely, wonderful museum, Ron, looking at things of the past, and I think in a town that's still looking towards the future.
Yes, you're right, Peter.
Tredegar, a mining village, foot of the grassy track, stands south of the town, a little way down the valley. Sadly, landslide threats caused many houses to be demolished, but remaining residents still remember this as a thriving community. Brian Gardner's lived in Tredegar all his life. A fascinating place to live, Brian.
Yes, there was a farm in this area around about 200 or 300 years ago. That farm itself was called the Tredegar farm. Everything was quiet here until round about the middle of the 19th century, and then everything broke loose. There was the sinking of the pit over in Betwelty Pits, and also the driving of a level into the mounting up behind the village here. The early village itself was called Himalaya Range. There was what was Tredegar Farm had now become the Fountain Inn, the start really of the shops and everything else that this village had.
So this village really was self-contained.
It was self-contained. It had its own shops that started to come. In fact, at that time as well, there was moves afoot to bring religion into the village. And an early chapel that appeared in the village here, which was called Armageddon, a Baptist chapel, came here at round about the same time.
But it had its own school as well, didn't it?
Yeah, well, there was two houses in the village that were taken over, which were actually rented from the Iron and Coal Company at that time. And those two houses were then used as an early school. Later, those same two houses was used as a Church of England.
But very little of the village now remains, Brian. What happened? Why did it disappear?
That all really started with the situation at Aberfan. I mean, there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's basically the thing. There was some concern with the local council. They seemed to think that the mounting behind here was the same as a coal tip, which it wasn't, of course. And they considered that there could be some danger at some point. That's what they tell us anyway. And what they then did was to sort of instigate a report, and things went on a bit from there. Now this is something around about this was around about 1972 that this actually took place. Well, here we are now. We're something like 30 odd years later, and I mean, there's no real problems here. And I can assure you, if I thought there was a problem, I'd have gone long before that. No tweet about it.
Yes, because there was some suggestion, wasn't it, that lots of these houses could be converted into holiday homes for visitors to the area.
Well, there may have been thoughts of that kind. I mean, we even considered at one point, because of the building of the garden festival there, that there may have been some instigation there to try to sort of get things moving.
Is it true, a story I've heard, that some of the roofs of early houses in this village were damaged in a peculiar way?
Yes, I mean, the folklore of it is that you're talking really about numbers 1 to 4, which was at the bottom end of the village. Yeah? At the beginning of the 20th century, there were people living in those houses, but within a couple of years, there was no one living there. And the folklore says that a balloon of some sort escaped from the recreation ground. It could have been something to do with Queen Victoria, her death or whatever at that time. But that balloon came or floated on the valley and landed on the first house and damaged the roofs. That was a consideration. How much you'll attach that, I don't know, but that was a thought.
Another little lovely story I've heard about this is connected with the farm and harvest time. Tell us something about that.
I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, as I said, we had everything here. We had 3 shops. We had a post office. Besides the chapel, as I spoke of earlier, we also had a church. Church of England, it was at that time, attached to St James's. The farm, or the Fountain Inn, as it became, that there was, it was still being run as a farm by the Masons at the time, and that's where we had the hay making and so on. Now they would go down, and most of the children from the village there, we'd have to get the hay in, we'd have the milk and the cheese and everything else. That it was pretty well nicely set up.
This village became a television set, didn't it, for certain programs, Brian?
Yeah, first of all, the Citadel was made here, Ben Cross and whatever. That was in the early 1980s. Later on, of course, the District Nurse, and quite a number of those episodes was done. And we've got, I got some nice memories of Neris Hughes and the people down here.
I remember something dramatic happening with the school.
Yeah, well, one of the episodes in the District Nurse was when they actually set fire to the school, and it was murder down here at the time. You couldn't move for cars, or the number of people who was watching it. They even had a fire engine on the turning place, ready to put it out if it got too bad. The interesting thing about that, the school itself, when you first looked at it, there was nothing going on there, just a couple of flames. All of a sudden, when they said shoot or take the shot, the whole school went up in flames. And then when he said cut, it all went back to what it was before. It's an unbelievable special effect.
You've lived all your life in Tredegar, Brian. Now, if you had a chance, would you live anywhere else?
No, I mean, you only need to walk outside my door to see the reasons why. I mean, a lot of people pay a lot of money for the type of views that I get from the front of my house. It's wonderful.
older Tredegar people can recall summer days walking up through Bowen's Meadows to the Nine Arches to spend happy hours paddling or swimming in the river. In those days of few cars, that was the closest many local children ever came to a day at the seaside. Gerald Davis is an expert on railway history and a possessor of a remarkable archive on the subject. Now, Tredegar's Nine Arches, Gerald, are a monument to a vanished age.
Yes, Peter. The viaduct was built in 1864 as part of the Merthyr Tredegar and Abergavenny Railway. It's 354 feet long and it's 50 feet from the height of the river to the top of the bridge. It was built as double track. The viaduct is built from local limestone. It's got beautiful tapering piers and it's now listed as a special architectural and historical interest. And on the 5th of January 1958, the last train ran over it.
Of course, Tredegar already had its own Sir Howie tramroad running down to the docks at Newport, Gerald, built in 1805, I believe.
Yes, that's right, Peter. It was converted into a railway, and it was taken over by the London North Western Railway Company, and then that was absorbed in 1923 by the LMS.
And of course, Tredegar became a railway town, did it not?
It did, indeed it did. And not only did the railway people become proud of working for the railway company, but they also built loco sheds and a very big railway station.
You know, I can remember the locomotives in Tredegar. You can tell us about those, I know.
Yeah, they had the Webb coal tanks, which came down to the branch in 1891. And about 1900, the first big Super Ds. These were gigantic 080 tender engines, and they had a clanking.
There was this lovely noise.
This clanking of the bearings as the engines ran down the valley. Of course, they ran down tender first. This was, of course, to keep the water over the crown of the firebox so that they wouldn't have any problems on the railways.
And I can remember, too, there was another very special sound about these locomotives, wasn't there? Very special sound.
Yeah, they had this very sharp, shrill crew whistle, which counteracted the mellow sound of the GWR Swindon engines.
Yes, yes, and of course I'm old enough to remember the New Year's Eve?
Yes, on New Year's Eve, any engines in steam at Tredegar Shed would blow their whistles to bring in the new year and all the good luck and good fortune that it could bring with it.
Yeah, I remember that well. And of course there was this great, well, shall we say, competition with the Great Western Railway, wasn't there?
Yeah, indeed, the LNWR and the LMS went out of their way to look for trade from any merchant who was willing and prepared to use the railway company to carry their goods.
Yes, of course.
And there was agreements with the Tredegar Iron and Coal Company that there would be a train on standby for any goods or any coal to come out of T-Trist and Dirty Pits Colliery as soon as it was required.
Well, of course, Gerald, there were several railway stations in this town, weren't there?
Yeah, that's right, Peter. There was Nantiboot Junction, which is just beyond the viaduct. Then there was Howie Station and Tredegar General. There was a platform for the T-Trist miners, which was called South End. And the next station was Bedwellty Pits. And the company also provided a platform at Porchin so that the miners could detrain there and go straight to their work at the colliery.
And of course, there was one never-to-be-forgotten occasion when a GWR loco worked up this line from Newport.
Yes, that was in 1940 at the commencement of the Second World War, when the evacuees from London were brought up by a GWR engine into Tredegar.
In 1940, many London children were evacuated here to be safe from German bombing. They would remember the town with affection, and some come to regard Tredegar as their home. In May 1940, German bombing was such on London that it was considered advisable to send many London children to South Wales towns as evacuees. One of them was Leslie Churchill, and you must have many memories of that time, Les.
We arrived at Sir Howie Station after a long journey, somewhat bewildered at being surrounded by these different sounding voices, because we'd been led to believe before we came that we were going to go on the Queen Mary to Canada, I think. Of course, I was only 7 years old at the time, wearing my label in my lapel so that everybody would know who I was. We were then ushered over to what was the drill hall, where it turned out I was separated from my two brothers and sister. And then we waited around until at last a man came over and told us to get into a car. And I'd never been in a car in my life. And then we were driven to what was Harford Street. We both jumped out, and he said to me, "You get back in, you're going into a house down there." So I did as I told, and eventually I arrived at the house, which was to remain my home then for many, many years, and still is. We were then organized for our education, and they gave us a classroom in various schools around Tredegar. Mine at first was Sir Harry, very convenient, and then after that, Glenhowie, and then eventually I was being taught in the Scout Hut. I still have in my possession a Bible presented to me by Carmel Baptist Chapel on commemorating my departure from Tredegar to go to university. And then after that, I went over into England of national service, and then to do my teaching. I was a teacher and married there. But I always brought my family back to what to me was my family home in Harford Street. And to my children, it was Tredegar was their father's home. And indeed, their father was, as far as they could see, as Welsh as they came.
One of Tredegar's best-known characters is Trevor Jones MBE, known to all as Trevor the Milk. If there is any favour required, any service to be done, or any information needed, Trevor is the man. I think it was about 50 years ago, Trevor, you had a photograph taken that, in a sense, made the world headlines.
Yes, it's very interesting. My brother and I were delivering churn milk with a horse and cart, crossing the railway lines in Park Place, when suddenly this huge American car, well, he said it's a mile long, that's exaggerating a bit, pulled up, and two guys got out, and they asked us if they could take a photograph. Okay, never had done before. Well, this guy then suddenly gets on top of the car with crepe-soled shoes. He'd never seen this done before. That was sacrilege. And there he was, clicking away. And he said, "Thank you very much," and he gave my brother and I £half each. End of story, so we thought. Then suddenly a lady in Tredegar had a son in Singapore, and he was looking for these books of photographs in the library, and in this book, the year's best photographs, there was this appeared. And the story goes on from there then.
Yes, yeah. It became one of the famous photographs still used in collections about industrial South Wales, isn't it?
Yes, it's appeared on television a few times, and a gentleman, Peter Lord, has it in his book of photographs.
Do you have the photograph now? You still have a copy of the photograph?
Yes.
Can you show it?
Got several. Yes.
God, oh. Oh, that's utterly amazing, isn't it?
It is. Amazing. And of course, the newspaper picked it up as well.
Well. World famous, Trevor.
Yes.
World famous. That's right. Of course, Eugene Smith was one of the world's great photographers. He worked for Time Life. But you didn't know that, did you?
We didn't know anything at the time.
No, of course
it's
not.
only in recent years. He was in Vietnam and all the rest of it. We found out all this.
God, an amazing man. When you think how delivering milk has changed in your time, Trevor, you know, I'm old enough to remember how milk was never delivered in bottles.
Yes, well, here you are. Okay. Measure. Jug. Nearly come out, put it in there. Yeah. Sometimes you had saucers over the top, sometimes you had to go in and wash the jug. That has been known, and then if they were a big order, you would have this.
Yes.
2 or 3 pints in here and cart it up steps to someone's house and pour it in their jug.
Yeah.
Our name is on the back, Jones & Sons Tredegar.
Yes.
And there again, and then it went on to bottles. These were the first, with a cardboard top.
Right.
We could poke a hole in there and put a straw in or whatever, or pour it out. This was Gwyn's dairy, Tredegar, actually.
Yes, yes.
And they are heavy.
I'd forgotten how heavy they were, because the glass today is very much thinner.
Yes, no. Then they went on to this with aluminium caps, which completely covered the top, but they decided these were unhygienic.
Yes.
And then they went on, this is the modern one.
Of course, of course. How things have changed. It's changed your time. I remember my mother used to go out with a milk jug, or I used to go out when we heard the milkman shouting milko.
Well,
with a jug like that, or usually a bit bigger.
They all had different things. All tradesmen used to shout, and one milkman here was, "Milko, 3 a pint, 3 a quart, bought you a door, what you want more? Milko, fresh from our own country farm."
I like that.
And most traders used to shout.
Yes, of course. The
Paperman used to shout.
That's right.
Everything.
That's right enough. I remember that. Tell me, your brother Tom, did he continue in the milk round?
Oh no. He went to seek fresh pastures in computers. He did all right, but I think he's retired now and he's hoping to take this over.
Oh, very nice. So, what about you looking back over your life, Trev? How do you think of the changes which have happened in the last half century?
Well, I'm probably one of the old-fashioned type. Oh, I'm called the midnight milkman and things like that, but I like to go out and meet people. The Valley's people are fantastic. They supported me in my hour of need. You can go out and have a chat. They discuss problems with you. You discuss your problems with those. And what more could one wish for?
And of course, that's the reason, or one of the major reasons you were awarded the MBE, Trevor.
It is. It is. I was nominated by a few local people, and it went forward and it was accepted. Mine, unfortunately, I did cause a bit of a commotion because I couldn't leave my work to go to Buckingham Palace. I had it presented in the Civic Centre instead, but that went off quite well. And the fact I didn't go gave me more publicity than if I had gone.
Indeed. So we can say really that the milk round has been your life, Trevor.
It has. It has. Well, only 2 jobs I ever had. That's the milk round and 2 years in the army in the South Wales Borderers. Well, I went to Cyprus, Egypt, Sudan. That was a wonderful experience. And being a paid clerk, it gave me a sense of administration work as well.
Yes, it did. That's right. Well, thank you very much, Trevor. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
And thank you, Peter.
The town band, winner of many championships, was founded in 1876. On summer Sundays, they give open-air performances at Bidwelty Park's bandstand, now completely restored by its original manufacturers. For 30 years, Alan Fox has been very closely associated with Tredegar Town Band and is now band secretary. Now, brass bands always seem to be linked with heavy industry, with iron and coal and steel working, Alan, with ironmasters. When did the band actually start?
The band started probably in 1849 and by the local ironmaster. We know that because we have a pamphlet describing a huge procession when the new mill in the works was formally opened. The scale of the patronage was such that the company slaughtered 60 bullocks to distribute to the poor of the town, and on top of that a huge quantity of hogsheads of beer, which ensured it was a very happy day. By the 1870s the band was in a fairly parlour state, and it took a special meeting of townspeople in the local town hall to virtually save the band and put it on what was to be a permanent footing for the next century. By 1904, the band were looking to extend their skills, and they poached from the north of England Eli Shaw, a magnificent player who became conductor as well, and over the next 3 decades did so much to improve standards and interest in the band in the community. By the 1970s, the Childs family, John Childs in particular, developed the town's youth band, which made an enormous conveyor belt of success. and which today is seen in a band, now the champion band of Wales.
The Tremerian Singers are another celebrated local musical group whose lady members practice in Budwelty House, not far from the bandstand.
Just a little while we were here together. For just a little while we were side by side. And I know someday that we will reflect on this and see what a special time it was. For just a little while we have joined our voices. For just a little while we made a difference here. And I know that through it all, these are days we will recall. What a special time it was. For just a little while. Maybe someday, when we're all alone, maybe someday, out there on our own, we'll remember this time and we'll smile for just a little while.
Tredegar's Orpheus male voice choir is also renowned for its high standards. It must be one of the few choirs to have had as member one who was awarded the French Croix de Guerre medal for bravery in battle. Herbert Hatton is chairman of the Tredegar Orpheus Choir, one of the major elements in the cultural life of this town. How long has the choir been operational, Herbert?
Well, the choir came into existence in October 1909, when it was actually formed from two smaller groups, who we know from the records was actually in existence about the 1880s. Well, then the first conductor of the choir was John Davy Evans, and he was with the choir until 1934. And during that time, they took part in about 150 different Eisteddfodau. And of that total, they won about 125 first prizes, which was amazing.
Indeed.
Of course, in those days, it was a thing to take part in Eisteddfodau. It was all in the villages, Tredegar, Trevor, all the rest of it. They were going on. Since then, the choir has continued, despite 2 world wars, with uninterrupted performances. And then, just after the war, there's been approximately 20 musical directors who've been involved with the choir. And of course, one of the significant things was that in 1974, we were given a sum of money by the Tredegar Urban District Council, which enabled us to take over this building, which is the old St. James's Parish Hall. And since then, we've done a tremendous amount of work there, renovated it, changed everything in here. And in 1996, we managed to get a major grant from the lottery of about £90,000. So we completely renovated the building from that, and it's as you see it today. And it's a remarkable building. It's got a lot of old memories of people in Tredegar. But it's used by a lot of organisations in the town. For various purposes, like the town band uses it for rehearsals and all the rest of it. But it is a major significance, as far as I'm concerned, in the culture of the town.
Do you see the choir going from strength to strength in the future?
Well, we hope so. The problem at the moment is with all choirs that the numbers are going down.
Ah, yes.
Because we're all getting a little bit older.
Yes.
But we are hopeful that some of our younger members are going to come back to the choir in the near future. So hopefully we should get back up. But of course, the days when the Iron took over, which was in 1965, in the 70s we were up to about 110, 120 members. Yes. Well, of course, we're much, much lower than that now.
I see.
And the same thing is happening to all choirs.
Oh,
but we are continuing to go on doing a lot of charity work.
Excellent.
And that is the main purpose of the choir at the moment.
It's hard to believe that on what is now wasteland once stood the great Tredegar furnaces where toiled thousands of men, women and children pouring the iron that helped make Britain great. Here worked such characters as Thomas Ellis Sr. He worked with Richard Trevethick and probably helped to build the first steam rail locomotive in the world. Daniel Gooch was trained here. He went on to become friend of Isambard Kingdom Brunel and indeed locomotive engineer of the Great Western Railway. Thomas Ellis Sr. built locomotives here, and I like to remember my great-grandfather who actually painted those locomotives and was a skilled man, skilled enough to paint the coach lines on them. But one character who had a great impact upon world history was Rhys Davis. Rhys Davis went from here to the United States of America, where he built the Tredegar Ironworks at Richmond, Virginia. It was that ironworks that made Richmond the capital of the Confederacy and became arsenal to the Southern armies. And I always think it's fascinating that most of the weaponry carried by the Southern armies was stamped Tredegar. At this very place it all began, the very reason for the town of Tredegar's existence. The Tredegar Ironworks that helped mold the history of the world have vanished, but in its stead are rising new factories and a new future beginning.
Together we can be so strong and bold. we can